Well, 2 days ago, we compared more than one linear relation in the same question. Then we took a day to talk about equations and some new skills involving equations. Now we're going to mix those two a little bit, but we're just doing some problem solving. But we're going to notice that a lot of these problems uh, are talking about more than one relationship. Okay, so again, remember, it often comes down to these questions are all about where do they cross and where is it better to use one or better to use the other. So we're going to look at a couple of multiple choice and a couple of open response EQAO kind of questions. First question, multiple choice. Two newspapers offer a classified section to advertise items for sale. The Cambridge Times and the Kitchener Record. These are real newspapers. Total cost to run an ad in each paper is represented by the graphs below. Before we get into it too much more, I just want to mention, there's all different ways, again, that these questions could be asked. It's always going to come down to the same thing. Where does it start? What does it change? That kind of thing. But in this case, it gives us both in the graph. It could give us one in the graph and one in words, or one in the graph and one in a table, one in a graph, one in an equation, or any mixture of any of those, right? So sometimes it's going to mix them, but in this case, it's showing us both in the graph. Now, the other thing about these questions is there's all different ways that you could figure this out. Okay, we could come up with equations, we could do table of values, and we could compare these in all kinds of different ways. So if you think of another way of doing it and you like that better or whatever, because that makes more sense to you, that's fine. The way that I'm going to show you is not necessarily the best way or the right way or anything like that. It's probably the way I would expect most people would do it. Um, and it's maybe, if you're not sure of how to solve this, it's maybe the easiest way to dive into this. But different people are definitely going to see it differently. Okay, so keep that in mind. This one's tricky because it says which of the following is true. Okay, so if I just look at this question, it's not actually asking me anything. I just have to read all four of these, and I have to decide which one is true, and I guess decide why the others are not true. Okay. Okay, so let's start looking at them one by one and decide and see if we can figure out if any of them are not true. You might think one of them is true, but I would go through and cross out the ones that are not true first and see what you're left with. I think that's the safest way to make sure that you're going to get the right answer. Now, one thing I noticed before we move on that I should fix at some point because I think in this lesson it's been like this forever, is these are not labeled. But I happen to know that this one is supposed to be the Cambridge Times and this one is supposed to be the Kitchener Record. Okay. Um, and in a test or an EQAO, they would definitely be labeled. You're not expected to guess or somehow figure out. There's nothing in the question that tells us it should be labeled in the graph. It's just missing for some reason. Which of the following is true? Cambridge Times is always cheaper. Why would somebody say yes to that? What do you think? Think about that for a minute, because there's a good reason why somebody might think that that one is correct. If they look at the graph, they say, well, that line is lower than this line, so it does look cheaper. And then the graph stops there, and it never gets more expensive. And somebody might say, yeah, this line is always below that line. But what does this arrow mean? We know that that arrow means that line keeps going. And that means that it's the way it's graphed is not finished. So I need to, whoops, what's going to be good right about there? I need to extend this graph and see where it would go if I kept going. We'll take a look. They cross here for 6, and then Cambridge Times becomes more expensive. Okay, so this is not true. Cambridge Times is always cheaper. Not true. It will eventually become more expensive, but some people might think that because the line stops. Okay, so our strategy here was, hey, extend the line and see where they cross. Now that might not always work, because I'm going to give you a tip. Sometimes the lines won't cross on the graph. What if they cross off the graph? That doesn't mean they never cross. It just means we can't see where they cross. Okay, but if we know they have different rates, they're going to cross at some point. Kitchener Record is always more expensive. Well, that's saying the same thing. If Cambridge Times is cheaper, Kitchener Record is more expensive. That's saying the same thing. That is not true. Kitchener Record is going to be cheaper for more times you run the ad. Okay. Kitchener Record is cheaper if the number of times the ad is run is fewer than 6. The Kitchener Record is cheaper. So fewer than 6, this is where 6 is. Fewer than 6, Kitchener Record is more expensive because it's above. Okay, so that one is also incorrect, which as long as I've done that correctly, now make sure you understand that because I don't want to go over that too fast. Make sure you understand if the number of times is fewer than 6, so that's any of these, it's saying Kitchener Record is cheaper, but it's not because it's above, right? It's $40 for those. Whereas an example, for 2, the Cambridge Times is only 20. So the Cambridge Times would be cheaper there. Cambridge Times is more expensive if the number of visits is greater than 6. That's true. After 6, Cambridge Times is above, and so it becomes more expensive. So this one is correct, and the answer is D. Okay. Didn't have to really show any work. I scribbled on the graph a lot, just thinking about it. I crossed off some of these, but I didn't have to come up with equations. I didn't have to do anything like that. In this case, I could answer it from the graph. Question 2, Calvin wants to rent an ice rink for a day and considers 2 arenas. The relationship between the total cost for renting from arena A for a certain number of hours is represented in the graph below. Okay, so it's telling us that this is A, right? Arena B charges a flat rate of $200 a day. Well, hold on. Let me go back up here for a second because something happened here that we haven't necessarily seen before. What does this flat line mean? It means no matter how many times you run the ad at the Kitchener Record, it's costing you $40. If I go 6 times, it's $40. 8 times, it's $40. No matter what, it's just $40. So this one doesn't have a cost per time you run it. It's just $40 flat. Well, that's what it's saying here. Arena B charges a flat rate of $200 for unlimited hours, but that's for 0, for 1, for 2, for 3, for any number of hours. It costs $200. So I am going to graph that. And again, make sure you understand what this flat line means. And that's Arena B. No matter how many times or how many hours you rent it for, it costs $200. That means it's going to be cheaper if you go a long time. For 10 hours, it's cheaper because you don't keep paying per hour. But Arena A starts cheaper. It's only $50 at the start, it looks like. But because there's a cost every hour, it will eventually cost more. Which of the following is true? So again, I could come up with equations for both of these, but I'm not sure that I have to. So let's just start reading through these and see if we can get rid of them. Arena A is cheaper for 10 hours. Well, 10 hours isn't on this graph, but which one do you think is going to be cheaper? B is going to be cheaper, right? Because A is going to be up here. So it's not that one. Both cost the same for 6 hours. That one looks right to me. They both cost the same, which is $200 for 6 hours. So that one's looking right, but I'm going to go through C and D and make sure that they are wrong as well. B is more expensive for 10 hours. Well, that's saying the same thing as A. If A is cheaper for 10 hours, B would be more expensive for 10 hours. So those are saying the same thing. So that's also wrong. Both cost the same for 200 hours. What is that even talking about? Why would somebody pick that? Well, if somebody didn't read the axes and they just saw 200, that is where they cross, but that's $200. So that's wrong as well. And sometimes in EQAO, they do that. They mix up the labels of the graphs, okay? So it was 6 hours where they cross, okay? So there's a couple of multiple choice questions. Let's take a look at an open response. This one's about cell phone chargers. Samsung Galaxy or Galaxy Samsung, that's not how you say it, but anyways, Samsung Galaxy phone is charging at a constant rate. Okay, so it's low on batteries, gets plugged in, and it's charging at a constant rate. After 2 minutes, the phone is 30% charged. After 6 minutes, the phone is 50% charged. That's a fast charger. Um, an iPhone charges 3 times the rate of the Samsung phone. That's ridiculous. This is not how fast they charge. But anyway, just a math question. Find the rate in percentage per minute that the iPhone is charging at. Whoa, so there's a lot going on here. We're comparing two different things, but it's not telling, all it tells us about the iPhone is that it's 3 times faster, but it gives me information about the Samsung. So if I can use that information about the Samsung to figure out the rate, then I can use that to figure out the rate of the iPhone, which is what it's asking me to find. Show your work, use the grid if you wish. EQAO says that sort of thing a lot because there are different ways of doing this and different people will do it different ways. So you don't have to use the graph just because they give you the graph. And sometimes they'll give you a graph and you don't have to use it. But if it says graph it, then you do, right? So just make sure you read carefully. And remember, if it's EQAO and you want your teacher to read it for you, you can just put your hand up and they will read the question for you. They can't explain it, but they can read it for you. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and graph it because that's easy to do, and why not? It's going to help me visualize. It's going to help me do stuff. And the grid is given to me nicely, so I think it'll be easy to do. At 2 minutes, the phone is 30% charged, so 2 minutes, it's at 30%. At 6 minutes, it's at 50%. Okay, so, whoops. I will draw a line through it like that. Okay, that's the Galaxy. Now, remember, I can't use the rate. I can't find the rate from just one point. What somebody might do is they might say, well, 30% in 2 minutes is 15% per minute. Is that right? Because 30 divided by 2 is 15. That's wrong because that only used one point. And a long time ago, we talked about when you can't do that, when it's not direct, when it doesn't start at 0, when it starts somewhere else, that will not work. That will definitely give us the wrong answer. If it's direct variation, that will give us the right answer. If it's indirect or partial variation, then that will not give us the right answer. So how do I find the rate? Well, I can just figure out how much it's going up each minute by looking at the graph, or I can do the thing where I look at the change this way and the change that way, and I'm going to do both so that we can see both different ones. Okay, so first thing I want to look at is this scale is counting by tens. Okay, so that's going up by tens. And in 2 minutes, I went up 1 full square. So I went up 10 in 2 minutes, which is 5 in 1 minute. Now, I can't guess that this is 5 in 1 minute because from 2 to 3 minutes is 1 minute. But I know it's 5 because I know it's half the distance that this one went up. And that one went up 10, so I know that it is 5. So using the graph, I can go plus 10 and plus 2. So the rate is 10 divided by 2, which is 5% per minute. Now, if it was a little bit nicer on the graph, I might not even have to divide. I might just be able to get the answer by looking at the graph, okay? And that's kind of what I did in this case, but I did have to divide. What if I wanted to just use these 2 points? Well, I would do something very similar. This is 30, this is 50. So 30 to 50 is up 20. And from 2 to 6 is up 4. And I would do the same thing where I would do the rate is 20 divided by 4. And again, on my calculator, that works out to 5% per minute. Okay, and remember, I calculated up here to be 15% per minute, but that was wrong because it was partial variation. What if I did 50 divided by 6? So now I'm doing this one. That is not 15 and it's not 5, it's another different answer. So 30 divided by 2 is 15. 50 divided by 6 is about 8. Those are different. That right there tells me that this is not direct, that this is partial variation, and I have to do more work to figure out the rate. Okay, so I did it 2 ways. I got the same answer. You would only really probably do it 1 way, but you know, that's sort of 2 similar but slightly different ways that you could find the rate. Now this is just for the Samsung phone. Okay, it wants us to find the rate for the iPhone, but the iPhone is 3 times the Samsung. So this is the Samsung Galaxy. So the iPhone is 3 times 5, which is 15% per minute. So again, take a look. I was given information about one of these. I was just told the iPhone is 3 times the other one. I had to find the rate of the Samsung with the information that I was given. I did graph it. I suppose I could have just done something like 50 minus 30 divided by 6 minus 2, because that's 20 divided by 4, which is 5, the same as I got there, right? I could have just subtracted these. That's what I did here. But using the graph and visualizing it is easier. It's something we've done more of, so I would imagine more people would feel comfortable with that. Okay. And show your work, use the grid if you wish, find the rate. I'm going to make a therefore statement. In EQAO, they always have kind of a place at the bottom where you put in the blank, but I'm going to say therefore, okay, the iPhone charges at 15% per minute. Ridiculous, but anyway, that's based on the math of this question. That's what it worked out to. Okay, last one. We're going to do one more. This is the last one. Music streaming. 2 competing companies are trying to get you to buy subscriptions to their music streaming service. Company A charges $10 every month for their service. Company B is shown in the graph. Here's one of these examples where it gives us one in the graph, but the other is described in words. Determine when each company is the better deal. Now, Company A charges $10. It only has one number in here. Is that the fixed fee up front, or is that the change or the rate? Well, it says $10 each month. So that means that's the change. So there's no fixed cost for company A. Okay, so you don't have to show this. I'm going to show this and write it out because I think it's good for us to think about that together, and you can see my thinking, but you wouldn't have to do all of this. So A has a start of 0 and a rate of 10. B has a start of 50. Look at that right there. Okay, the start is 50 and the rate, well, we haven't figured that out. Let's see. I went from 0, I went up 2, and from 50 to 60 I went up 10. So the rate is 10 divided by 2, which is 5. So A has a start of 0, but a rate of 10. B has a start of 50, but a rate of 5. So similar to the other ones we've seen, one of them starts cheaper, but grows faster. One of them starts more expensive, but grows slower. Okay. When each company is the better deal. So I'm going to graph company A. and because I think that's going to help, again, visualize it. So A has a start of 0. And in one, what is this? Number of songs. Oh, it does. The graph's not labeled properly. Whoops. I'm going to think that this must be the number of songs streamed kind of thing. And this one's going to be total cost. So I'll call this N in dollars, and we'll call that capital C. Okay? And just in case we have to come up with equations or something like that. Oh, so for 2 songs, for 1 song, for A, which is what we're graphing right now, it would be 10, but I'm not going up by 1 song here, I'm going up by 2 songs. So if I go up $10 for 1 song, for 2 songs, that would be $20. 2 more songs, $20 more. 2 more songs, $20 more. Okay, so let me graph this. Again, it should be forming a nice straight line. Okay, there we go. And this is company A. Okay. As I said, you don't necessarily have, it doesn't say graph them. It just says figure out the answer to this question, right? When is each company the better deal? Graphing is probably the easiest, but you could turn them both into a table. You can turn them both into equations. Turning them both into equations would be a little bit trickier to solve. In fact, that's more like a grade 10 kind of a question. So be careful of that. But the graph is easy because now I can see where they cross, and they cross at, looks like 10 songs or 10 streams. Okay. So I hope it's not streams, because $100 for 10 streams is pretty ridiculous. Even $100 for 10 songs. Or it's per month. Sorry, it's a monthly. It's not per song. It's number of months. That makes more sense. So one of them has a startup cost, and one of them doesn't, and it's just the number of months. That's more reasonable. All right. So they both cost $100 for 10 months. But when is each the better deal? So A is better for fewer than 10 months because it's below, right? So it's cheaper. And again, you can come up with a particular example if you want. And I can say, what about for 4 months? Well, A is only $40 and B is $70. So B is cheaper. Or sorry, B is more expensive. A is cheaper, right? So A is cheaper for fewer songs. Sometimes we get this backwards for whatever reason. In our head, we mix them up. So thinking about a specific example can help you make sure that you're on the right track. So A is cheaper for fewer than 10 months. And it says both, so it's obvious if A is cheaper for fewer, then B is going to be cheaper for more, but you have to say that B is cheaper for more than 10 months. In this case, if you said 11 months or more, that would probably be fine, because you can't usually do 10 and a half months. If you go into the next month, you pay for the full month and you get the service for that whole month, right? Then you cancel and it would end at the end of the month. So if you said 11 or more months, that would be fine. And if you said 9 or fewer months, that would also be fine, because I think that's fair. Or you can say fewer than 10 and more than 10, and I think I've answered the question. Okay, so that was a great example of a question that gives us part of the information in a graph, and in this case, part of the information in words. Like I said, it could have given us some of the information in an equation or something like that instead. Okay, I think that's it. Hopefully that makes, hopefully that's good. That makes sense. We saw a few different a couple of different multiple choice and a couple of open response, and all different kinds of questions asking all different kinds of things. And that's really what this stuff all comes down to. Every question's a little bit different, and you gotta understand what information you're being given and figure out what to do. And sometimes it's not obvious what to do, but if you're given a graph, hey, just graph it, even if it's not required. The question didn't say graph it. Even if it's not required, you might as well start with that and try something. Okay. So keep in mind all those strategies. Keep in mind the two properties of a linear relation. And again, keep in mind when you're comparing, you're looking at where the lines cross and thinking about what that means.